Clara and Max always seemed like the perfect couple. They met during the darkest period of Clara's life, shortly after the death of her younger sister, Laura. Max, Laura's childhood friend, had always been there, supporting her as her world crumbled. This shared pain brought them closer, and within a few months, they began dating. For Clara, Max wasn't just a source of comfort. He became her hope for a new life, one that could give her a sense of purpose. From the very beginning, their marriage seemed to everyone to be a testament to strength and loyalty, despite the tragedy that lingered in the background of their lives. Clara worked as an interior designer, creating elegant projects for wealthy clients, while Max was a successful architect known for his grand designs. They built their new home in a small town, where they were welcomed as a couple who had overcome hardship and created something beautiful. However, despite the outward appearance of perfection, their relationship always carried the shadow of the past. Laura's presence seemed ever present, standing invisibly between them. Clara often felt that Max was lost in memories of her sister, and it seemed to her that he hadn't fully let go of his grief. Yet, she never asked too many questions, choosing to believe that time would heal all wounds. As the years went by, their marriage began to feel more like a partnership. They worked on projects together, built their careers, and their home became a place where they returned after a long day of busyness. Clara often turned to her mother, Maria, who had played a pivotal role in her life after Laura's death. Maria, an energetic and independent woman, was always there, helping Clara avoid sinking into grief and depression. But Clara had no idea that behind the facade of family bliss lay betrayal and deceit that would soon shatter everything they had worked so hard to build. Despite the apparent stability in their relationship, Clara and Max had been drifting apart. Their conversations grew more superficial, and their meetings became rare due to their hectic work schedules. Clara threw herself into her projects, while Max often stayed late at work, avoiding coming home to a house that no longer brought him joy. But what troubled Clara most was that their future together was becoming more and more unclear, as if they had lost their shared goals and dreams. Amid this, the relationship between Max and Maria began to change. Maria, always vibrant and full of life, also felt a void and loneliness after Laura's death. She began inviting Max over more often to help with household tasks, fixing something in the garden, assisting with repairs. At first, everything seemed innocent. They discussed common plans and shared memories of Laura. But gradually, their conversations became more personal, and their meetings more frequent. Max, on the other hand, found in Maria what was missing in his relationship with Clara. She listened to him, supported him, and, most importantly, reminded him of the past, a time when life felt simpler and lighter. They began spending more time together, not just for household chores, but for leisurely conversations over a glass of wine on Maria's porch. One evening, when Clara was occupied with a new project and couldn't attend a family dinner, Max went to Maria's house alone. That evening, their relationship crossed a line they had previously respected. After a couple of glasses of wine, the conversation shifted from memories of Laura to their own personal lives. Max confessed that he felt lost in his marriage, that the love they had once shared now felt like an illusion. Maria, feeling lonely herself, opened up about her own struggles. What started as an innocent confession soon escalated into something more. A casual touch, a fleeting glance. They both knew this was no longer just a conversation. An intimate bond formed between them. Thus began their secret affair, driven not only by physical attraction but also by emotional dependence on one another. The affair between Max and Maria continued in secret. They met more and more often under various pretexts, repairing something at the house, helping with the garden. Clara, immersed in her work and still battling the unresolved grief of losing Laura, didn't notice the changes right away. But eventually, things became too obvious. Max started to distance himself. He stayed later at work, came home exhausted, and grew distant and irritable. His touch became rare and cold, and their conversations turned short and formal. He began declining family gatherings and dinners, citing exhaustion. Clara sensed that something had changed, but she tried to brush it off, attributing it to stress and fatigue. However, her doubts slowly grew. Her mother, always ready to support her, suddenly became evasive. Maria began canceling their usual tea times, claiming she was busy or not feeling well. When Clara visited her, her mother seemed anxious, nervous, avoiding eye contact and any deep conversations. Clara's suspicions intensified when she accidentally saw strange messages on Max's phone. One of them was from Maria, and although the message seemed ordinary, the tone was too personal and familiar. Max began hiding his phone, avoiding her questions, and leaving the room to answer calls. Clara began to wonder if such a betrayal was possible, that her husband might be cheating on her with her own mother. She couldn't bring herself to believe it, but more and more little details pointed to the worst scenario. Strange conversations, sudden cancellations of plans, secretive glances. It all started to form a horrifying picture. One evening, when Max said he was leaving for a business trip for a few days, Clara decided to check on his story. She drove to her mother's house and saw Max's car parked outside. In that moment, her suspicions turned into the horrible realization that they had been hiding the truth from her. Overcome with anger and pain, Clara stood outside her mother's house, trying to gather her thoughts. Everything she saw, Max's car parked at Maria's house, confirmed her worst fears. Her heart pounded so loudly it felt like it might burst. She couldn't stand the uncertainty any longer and decided to take action. Entering her mother's house, Clara immediately sensed that something was off in the atmosphere of the room. The silence was too tense, and the whispers from the living room were too loud to be just a conversation. She walked in without thinking about her emotions. And there, in the living room, on the very couch where they once gathered as a family, Clara saw something she could never have imagined. Max and Maria sat too close to one another, in an intimate pose that couldn't be explained by anything other than what had been happening between them. Maria softly touched Max's hand, and in return, he looked at her in a way he hadn't looked at Clara in a long time. This wasn't just innocent conversation. There was a connection between them that Clara could no longer deny. Unable to hold back, Clara burst into the room, screaming. The shock on both Maria and Max's faces was undeniable. They froze as if they couldn't believe their secret had been exposed. Maria, panicking, tried to explain, but the words caught in her throat. Max, filled with guilt, stood up, attempting to justify what had happened, but his excuses sounded hollow. Clara demanded explanations, her voice breaking from the pain and rage. She couldn't believe the betrayal not only from her husband, but also from her own mother. Max tried to calm her down, saying things had gotten out of hand, that it was a mistake, that they never meant for it to go this far. But every word he said only fueled Clara's anger. Maria, still sitting on the couch, couldn't find the words. She knew her actions had destroyed her daughter's life, but something inside her couldn't fully admit her guilt. She only quietly said that she was lonely, that she needed someone after Laura's death. But Clara couldn't accept that. This betrayal was too great to be justified by loneliness. The confrontation escalated into shouting, where Clara demanded answers but received only excuses that further shattered her trust. The revelation she had feared so much had become reality. At that moment, Clara realized she could no longer live with this knowledge. She walked out, leaving them behind, knowing her family was forever destroyed. After the painful discovery, Clara returned home, barely holding back tears. The world around her felt foreign, as if all the colors had faded. Her house, once a cozy refuge, now seemed cold and empty, reflecting her inner turmoil. She wandered through the rooms, trying to grasp the fact that everything she had believed to be her foundation was destroyed in an instant. Emotions washed over her in waves: anger, despair, and pain. Clara couldn't find peace. Every corner of the house reminded her of the life that now felt like a lie. She sat on the couch and, unable to hold back any longer, sobbed, recalling every moment of her life with Max, every bit of support from her mother. It all now seemed like a deception. She felt betrayed twice, by her husband and the woman who meant everything to her. But after hours of crying, her pain began to transform into something cold and calculating: vengeance. She realized she couldn't just walk away and leave things as they were. These two people, the ones she loved most, would have to pay for their betrayal. A plan began to form in her mind. She didn't just want to punish Max and Maria. She wanted to do it in a way that would change their lives forever. Everything that had happened up to this point felt like a lie, as if she had been living someone else's life. But now, she saw this as her chance to take control. She was no longer the victim. Now she would be the one setting the rules. She picked up her phone and texted Max, suggesting they meet the next day for an honest conversation. She made it seem like she was ready to discuss their relationship and find a way forward. But in her mind, a devious plan had already taken shape. Clara intended for this meeting to be the beginning of their downfall. She planned to lure them into a conversation and then brutally expose them in front of everyone they trusted. Clara decided to organize a dinner at their house, inviting both Max and Maria. She planned to gather her entire family and close friends under the pretext of discussing family matters. But her real goal was to stage a public revelation. She gathered all the evidence, messages, photos, any proof she could find to confirm their affair. This wouldn't just be an emotional confrontation. It would be a moment where she would tear their lives apart, just as they had torn hers. At this moment, Clara felt a strange sense of relief. Her pain receded, replaced by cold calculation. She was confident she could regain control of the situation and make them suffer as much as she had. The next day, Clara began preparing her plan. She decided the evening would take place at their home, where close friends and family members would gather. She invited everyone under the pretense of an important family dinner, telling them it was an opportunity to discuss future plans and perhaps mend strained relationships. Clara meticulously planned every detail so that no one would suspect her true intentions. Clara carefully prepared the house, trying to restore the warmth it once had before her life was turned upside down. Everything on the surface had to look perfect, just like before. Candles on the table, wine, and dishes she had prepared herself. But underneath this facade, a tense atmosphere lingered, with every action and detail feeling like part of a build-up to something catastrophic. Throughout the day, Clara remained in a strange state of calm, masking the storm that raged within her. She gathered all the evidence, messages from Max's phone, photos, credit card statements. She intended to reveal it all at the most unexpected moment, when her betrayers would least expect it. As evening fell, the guests began to arrive. The rooms filled with voices, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, and no one suspected that this was not going to be a friendly dinner, but rather a public exposure. Maria, despite the recent events, came to the house with a sense of tension but tried to hide it. Max, also inwardly conflicted, tried to act normal, but his eyes constantly avoided Clara. Clara, wearing the mask of a gracious hostess, politely greeted the guests, though inside her, the tension was mounting. She saw how Maria and Max avoided her gaze, how they tried to conceal their fear. All of this only fueled her determination. She was ready to make this evening unforgettable for both of them. Once everyone was seated at the table, Clara pretended to prepare for a traditional family speech. Her voice was calm as she spoke about family, trust, and loyalty. But as she continued, her words took on a different tone, one filled with pain and accusations. The guests began to glance at each other, sensing that something was off, though they didn't yet understand where this was heading. After a pause, Clara pulled out the evidence she had prepared in advance. Her voice became cold and firm. She started naming things for what they were: betrayal, lies, and deception. Her words cut through the air like daggers, and the shock on the faces of the guests, Max and Maria, confirmed that her plan was working. Maria and Max sat frozen, unable to speak. Clara calmly laid out all the evidence of their affair: screenshots of messages, photos of their meetings, even hotel receipts they had used for their secret rendezvous. The silence in the room became deafening, and no one could believe what they had just heard. Clara finished her speech with the words, "This is what trust means in my family. This is what it feels like to be betrayed by your own mother and husband." She stared directly at Max and Maria, her contempt barely concealed. Her revelation had delivered the most painful blow to them both. In that moment, the atmosphere became unbearably tense. Max, realizing for the first time that their secrets had been uncovered, tried to explain himself, but his words were drowned out by the murmur of discussions and shocked gasps from the guests. Maria, overwhelmed by shame and guilt, couldn't find the words. Everything they had hidden had come to light, and now their entire world was crumbling before everyone's eyes. As Clara finished her expose, she realized that she no longer felt anger. Instead, she felt an odd sense of closure. She had achieved what she set out to do. Their lives were now as shattered as hers had been. After the public confrontation, a suffocating silence filled the room, broken only by whispers from the guests and the occasional clinking of silverware. Maria and Max seemed to be in a daze. Maria, shaking from shame, slowly covered her face with her hands, unable to meet the eyes of those around her. Max tried to stand, but his legs felt like lead. His pride and confidence, once so unshakable, had crumbled into dust. Clara, standing at the head of the table, watched the reactions of the guests. They, stunned by the events, exchanged bewildered glances. In that moment, Clara was flooded with a sense of inner satisfaction. The truth had been spoken, the lies exposed. She had gotten what she wanted. But instead of feeling relief or victory, Clara felt empty. No one knew what to say, and the vengeance she had planned brought her no peace. Max, mustering what little strength he had left, finally spoke. He tried to explain himself to the guests, but his words were incoherent. "This isn't what you think, Clara. It wasn't supposed to go this far. We didn't mean for this to happen." But his pleas for forgiveness only irritated Clara. She could no longer stand his hypocrisy and lies. She cut him off with a sharp tone. "You lied to my face for months. How dare you try to explain it now?" Maria, trying to retain a shred of dignity, stood up and, hiding her tears, spoke to Clara. "Daughter, please, listen to me. I never wanted to betray you. I was lonely. I lost Laura, and it was so hard. I needed comfort." Her words were drowned in Clara's fury, who could no longer contain herself. "You sought comfort in my husband? How could you do this to me? To your own daughter?" The tension in the room escalated, and a few guests tried to intervene to calm Clara down. But her rage only grew. She hurled accusations at her mother that had been festering in her soul for years, blaming her for the betrayal, the unspoken words, and the shattered hopes. Maria, trembling, tried to say something, but realized it was futile. She had lost her daughter forever. Max, realizing that he had lost control of the situation, stepped forward to Clara, trying to grab her hand to calm her down, but she sharply pulled away. "Don't touch me. Everything between us is dead," she screamed, her voice trembling with rage and pain. At that moment, the tension reached its peak. Maria, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, fell to her knees before Clara, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. But Clara remained resolute. She no longer saw her mother. She saw a woman who had destroyed her life. Max, feeling completely powerless, also dropped to his knees beside Maria, acknowledging his guilt and begging for forgiveness. The guests, witnessing such a scene, quietly left the house, realizing this was the end. No one tried to interfere or offer words of comfort. Clara was left standing alone, in the middle of a shattered world that had once been her home. When the last of the guests had gone and silence filled the house, Clara suddenly felt an overwhelming emptiness. Everything she had thought of as her purpose turned out to be an illusion. Revenge had brought no relief. She had destroyed their lives, but in return, she felt no peace or satisfaction. Clara looked at her mother and husband, now broken by her revelation, and realized that they had lost everything, just as she had. Clara silently left the house, leaving Maria and Max to their own guilt. She now knew that their lives were as ruined as hers, but no punishment could ever bring back the years of love and trust that had been lost. She walked into the night, understanding that her revenge, just like their betrayal, had condemned them all to eternal pain. Several days had passed since Clara's explosive revelation at the family dinner. She had completely cut off contact with her mother and Max, ignoring their calls and messages. Their pleas for forgiveness were nothing but background noise, and she no longer cared to listen. Clara had begun to realize that the life she had spent so long building ended the moment she saw her husband and mother together. But instead of the satisfaction she had hoped to feel after the exposure, her soul was consumed by emptiness. Max, after everything that had happened, barely left the house. He was crushed by the realization that he had destroyed his family. He had moved out to give Clara space, but every day he tried to reach out to her. He knew forgiveness was impossible, but he hoped for at least a chance to talk. His life had become a chain of endless regrets and guilt. Maria was suffering even more deeply. She understood that her actions had not only betrayed her daughter but had destroyed the most important relationship in her life, her bond with Clara. She sought comfort, but her world had shrunk to the walls of her now empty home. All her friends had turned away from her upon learning about the affair, and now she was utterly alone. She tried to call Clara, wrote her letters, but all she received in return was silence. Clara, on the other hand, was in a deep emotional crisis. She had withdrawn from work, stopped seeing friends, and didn't even open the curtains to let in the daylight. Every corner of her house reminded her of the life she had lost. The kitchen table where she and Max once had breakfast, discussing plans for the future. The living room where they had laughed together, hosting guests. All these memories were now tainted by betrayal. One day, while sitting in the living room, Clara picked up old photographs of her and Max from years ago, before Laura's tragic death. Back then, everything had seemed so simple and happy. She began to realize that her life with Max had always been overshadowed by the past, and Laura's death had become an invisible barrier that had destroyed their relationship long before the affair. Meanwhile, Clara began receiving letters from Maria. In each one, her mother tried to explain her feelings, her loneliness, and the pain she had felt after Laura's death. She admitted that she had sought comfort in Max because he was her last connection to Laura, and her emotions had become confused. But to Clara, these letters were only a reminder that instead of being her support, her mother had destroyed everything. Over time, Clara began to understand that even if she could never forgive them, she had to find a way to move on. The constant pain of betrayal was draining her emotionally, and she started looking for ways to heal herself. She reached out to a therapist to help her process her feelings and begin the slow journey toward recovery. In one of those sessions, Clara admitted that revenge had brought her no relief. She realized that by destroying Max and Maria's lives, she had not been able to regain the lost trust, love, or peace. She had tried to find control in revenge, but instead had lost control of her own life. These realizations were painful but necessary for her to start her path to healing.